Hey Noah listeners, welcome back to the Family Formation series, jumping back in, and I'm really excited. I have a quick question for you. Do you believe that soulmates exist? I'm going to dive into something called the soulmate myth, and if that interests you, stick around. But first, I wanted to share something that you might be interested in. If you are a parent or maybe you plan on having kids someday, it can be really hard to know how to raise your kids with a biblical worldview in a world that is so opposite of a biblical worldview. So I wanted to give you a resource. You may remember, if you've been listening for a little while, that I interviewed Andrea Crum. She leads Genuine Family Ministries, and every year she hosts a Raising Biblical Kids conference for parents. The conference is coming up really soon. It's in Grapevine, Texas, this coming November 15th, 2025. And Andrea has shared a discount code with No Why listeners, which is SAVE10. That is capital SAVE 10, all caps. And by using this discount code, when you register for the conference, you'll actually get $10 off of your ticket, making it only $15 a person. I know that they have a great lineup of speakers. And again, Andrea herself is so amazing. I've interviewed her both for the No Why podcast and Point of View radio talk show. So I know that this is going to be a wonderful tool to equip parents. Go to my show notes and I have a link there to the webpage for the conference so that you can read about it and register if you so choose. And if you decide that you're going to register for that, then drop a comment and thank Andrea and go back and listen to her interview with the No Why podcast on how we know what is absolutely true. That was in our Know Why God is Good series. But let's jump back into this week's content. Is having a soulmate a myth? Now, I know that there are people who probably believe a lot of different things about this. Maybe you are a full-on soulmate believer. Maybe you think, well, no, I don't believe that there's just one perfect person for everybody, but my spouse is my soulmate. And maybe that you're already completely disenfranchised or never even believed in that myth. And you say, no, there's no such thing as a soulmate. Well, let's look at the data. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, I'm going to refer quite a bit in this series to the book Get Married by Dr. Brad Wilcox, because it does include so much great information that is, again, based on a lot of research, very well sourced, that just looks at, hey, here's how marriage benefits individuals. Here's how it benefits kids. Here are the demographics that tend to make marriage work the best. And there's a lot of good information in here, which will not all be covered on the podcast series by far. So definitely, if you want to actually know all of that information, get the book for yourself, and I'll link it here below. But today, the soulmate myth. So here's some interesting information. According to one survey that is cited in the book, over 90% of young people believe that when you marry, your spouse should be your soulmate first and foremost. So that doesn't necessarily tell us whether or not 90% of single young people believe that there is only one soulmate out there, like the one person for you, the one. But they are believing that when you decide to marry a person, that before anything else, that person needs to be your soulmate. Here is another statistic. This is from the National Marriage Project poll. 88% of young unmarried adults agreed there was a special person, a soulmate, waiting for you somewhere out there. Okay, so that does touch on people believing that the one exists, and we just have to hope and pray or try to find them. But here is something else that a lot of people may not know. People who believe in the soulmate myth are more vulnerable to divorce. And if you're wondering why I'm calling it a myth, well, just keep listening, because Dr. Wilcox does a great job of combining a lot of evidence to really show us how it is a myth, but we're just calling it the soulmate myth for now. So people who believe in the soulmate myth are more vulnerable to divorce. According to a 2019 California family survey, people who have a soulmate model of marriage, in terms of their viewpoint of marriage, were more likely to admit that their own marriage might not last over those who had a family first marriage view. And we're going to talk about what a family first marriage is in a few minutes as well. These next two pieces of information are just really mind-blowing. I was surprised. Spouses with a soulmate view of marriage were about 90% more likely to express doubts about their marriage in that same survey. And then another survey more recently from 2022 from the State of Our Unions survey found that spouses who held a soulmate view were twice as likely to either be divorcing or get divorced in the future. Okay, so the majority of people, at least young single people, believe in some version of the soulmate myth. And yet, according to these statistics, people who believe in the soulmate model of marriage are more likely to be having doubts, be having struggles, and actually get divorced. So now let's define our terms. What is the soulmate myth? What is the soulmate view of marriage? And what's that other thing we mentioned? A family first view of marriage. Well, let's get into it. People who buy into the soulmate myth of marriage tend to believe that a happy marriage shouldn't require extensive endurance or forbearance. That is a quote from Eli Finkel, who is a psychologist, and he wrote the book All or Nothing Marriage. So in other words, it shouldn't take a lot of effort. Staying in love should be easy. And if you really think about it, even if you wouldn't agree with that right now, if you would say, well, no, I'm sure it takes work. Most of us, I think, kind of intuitively or subconsciously, based on what culture tells us, we think that being in love should be easy. Falling in love, staying in love should be easy. So there's a quote that you may have seen on Pinterest or Tumblr back in the day, if you're a millennial, and it's attributed to Johnny Depp. I'm not sure if that's actually who it came from, but it is who it's attributed to, which is, if you love two people at the same time, choose the second, because if you had really loved the first one, you wouldn't have fallen for the second. Sounds kind of like common sense, but really what that is an example of the soulmate myth, because if you are really truly in love with somebody, and if you're going to get married to them or stay committed to them long term, being in love is the goal, then being in love should be easy, so easy that you won't ever fall out of love with them. And if you do, it must mean that it wasn't true love. What all the princess movies tell us, right? I think a lot of people believe that, even if they don't necessarily think about it that much. So it's funny because it's funny that it's happened twice in the last few months. This book, Get Married, actually references the book Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Well, if you've been listening to the No Why podcast, you'll know that last summer, I did an episode on You Have a Calling, which is a book by Karen Swallow Prior. And she also quotes Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. Two totally different topics, though. She was talking about how Gilbert has actually a really helpful breakdown of our understanding of hobby versus job versus career versus vocation. And so that was a very positive view of that specific thing that Gilbert had written. Dr. Wilcox, however, looks at Gilbert's philosophy on love and marriage, and he has some critiques. So in her story, in this book by Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, she writes that she's rejecting, well, I'll just read the quote from Wilcox. Gilbert makes it clear to her reader that she is rejecting an older model of life and love, a model that assumed your life belongs to everyone else, your father, your husband, your child, your community, in favor of a new model of life and love that puts the desires of self in the driver's seat. What if, she asks, your life belongs to you? Now, again, that can sound very inspirational, and it's very similar to what we hear in culture all the time. Like set boundaries, self-love, self-care, protect your interests, and you should be able to pursue what you want in life. So that's really the kind of philosophy that she's putting forward, and was the impetus for the whole journey that inspired the book Eat, Pray, Love. She ended up leaving a marriage that she realized that she didn't want anymore, and she goes on this grand adventure where she's seeking out, spirituality, and she's trying to find herself. And along the way, she ends up finding who she called her soulmate as well. So if we want to get a little more specific, though, this philosophy or way of thinking that Elizabeth Gilbert was advocating and that she had lived out, and that honestly is just so pervasive in our culture, is called expressive individualism. Okay, so Dr. Wilcox quotes Carl Trueman, who said, human beings are defined by their individual psychological core, and the purpose of life is allowing that core to find social expression in relationships. Anything that challenges the self's desires is deemed oppressive. That's Trueman on what expressive individualism means. And so that's why we seek a soulmate, because if the self-desire, like Elizabeth Gilbert writes, your life belongs to you, and pursuing our desires is our main goal in life, to make sure that we live a happy and fulfilled life, that we get out of life what we want to get out of it before we die, then of course, when it comes to romantic love and commitment in marriage, we seek a soulmate. When we say soulmate, I think most people agree in thinking that that means somebody who is perfect for us. They are the person, the one that our soul was meant for. Even in modern fantasy, romantasy, like there's this whole thing, right, about finding your mate. That's the one that you're supposed to be with. And if you're with anybody else, it's like not working out very well. So even and a lot of people would say, like, obviously I don't believe in that, but I think in our culture, we kind of do. I think that trend to talk about that a lot that's become very popular is actually reflective of what we kind of already believe in our culture, which is this idea that there's some perfect person for us. And if we're not happy or fulfilled, or our relationships or life isn't working out the way we wanted to, it's probably because we're not with our soulmate, or at least that might be one of the reasons. So again, this idea is based on the belief that you need to be feeling happy and fulfilled. That's what you should be pursuing. So the way that Dr. Wilcox defines it in his book, Get Married, the myth of the soulmate is the idea that marriage is primarily about feeling an intensely emotional or romantic connection with the one that makes you happy and fulfilled. This is a model of marriage deeply shaped by the expressive individualism that took off in the 1970s. So again, we defined that a moment ago. Expressive individualism is that the purpose of life is allowing our psychological core to find social expression in relationships. And whenever our desires, whenever that core of our being is challenged, that's oppressive. That is unfair to us. That is an injustice, because the individual expressive individualism is saying that it is our right to be able to fully express who we really are. That applies to so much that we see in our culture today, and goes so fundamentally against what the Bible teaches about human beings. But let's stay focused on the soulmate for now. It's really not surprising to me that expressive individualism gave birth to this idea of a soulmate. Because again, if your highest thing that you value in life is being able to fully express yourself and achieve this, highest level of personal satisfaction and fulfillment by following what makes you happy, then a soulmate needs to be somebody that matches you. It needs to be somebody that fits in with your life, with your goals and your dreams. It needs to be somebody who is the perfect match for you. That also means, though, that you are not going to be, even when you approach a relationship, your mind isn't naturally going to go to thinking about ways that you might compromise for another person for the sake of a relationship that is overall beneficial to both parties. If there is any sort of level of compromise or disagreement or things that don't perfectly align and match up, I think people are more likely to dismiss what would be, again, largely beneficial, because it's not a perfect match. And you think, well, if somebody's a perfect match for me, then I'm not going to have to give up anything or compromise on anything or be unhappy in any way. That's the mindset. And if being able to do exactly what you want, or in other words, self-fulfillment, if that's the goal, then you're only going to get married if the person is going to give you exactly what you want. And so I think maybe people, they kind of think, okay, status quo, I'm pursuing me. I'm pursuing my own self-fulfillment and actualization and expression. And so why would I get married to somebody who is going to interfere with that? And so that's staying single. It's going to be the default. It's like people are going to have to be overly convinced to get married. And I think that that's kind of the attitude that we're seeing. Now, I'm not advocating for anybody who's listening and is like, well, you shouldn't just go indiscriminately get married to somebody that's not a good fit. I'm not saying that. But I think that we have gone in a society from seeing marriage as a objective good that is a positive and needed institution for society, especially for the well-being of families, to seeing it as an attractive option if you find that right person and if they're not going to hinder you at all. So there's this book published in 1970 called Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach. And there's this famous quote. It sounds like a really nice quote. It sounds very romantic. It might be the kind of thing that you see at weddings and, on the program and things like that. A soulmate is someone who has the locks to fit our keys and the keys to fit our locks. So that sounds so nice. But again, it kind of gives us this idea that that person that is right for us to marry is going to perfectly match up with everything that we want, and vice versa. Like, it has to be the perfect match. It has to be the lock and key. There can't be any dissonance or friction there, because if that's the case, well, then it must not be right? That's at least what Elizabeth Gilbert seemed to be advocating. So she went on her journey. She found her soulmate, and they divorced after 10 years. And she found several other soulmates as well. And at the time, at least, of the writing of Get Married, she was living life as a single woman. Nothing wrong with being single. But I think maybe that's why we see, not maybe, but definitely why you see people who buy into the soulmate view of marriage are much more likely, as we saw from all the data I mentioned a few minutes ago, to be prone to divorce. Because if something all of a sudden doesn't match up the right way, or you find yourself not feeling in love, not feeling that intense emotional and romantic connection with somebody anymore, then, well, they're not my soulmate. And maybe people think, well, they were never my soulmate to begin with, or maybe they're not my soulmate anymore. Maybe I've changed as a person and now I need a different soulmate that matches up with where I feel and what I want and where I want to go at this stage of my life. So it's not very conducive to a long-term, lifelong, till death do us part kind of commitment. But back to that quote about the soulmate being somebody who has the locks to fit our keys and the keys to fit our locks. This is something that Dr. Wilcox raises, which I think is important. He says, no one person, no one relationship can give us great pleasure and great happiness all or even most of the time. And so men and women who embrace the soulmate model are often left disappointed by the real world realities of love and marriage. And so I think that's important to remember. As romantic as that lock and key quote is, maybe the person that you marry, and I think this should be the case, maybe there are a lot of locks that fit our keys and keys that fit our locks and vice versa, but maybe not all of them, because one person can't be expected to fulfill everything in your life. And your relationship with somebody else, with another person, also shouldn't be all about your personal fulfillment either. And that leads us to what I mentioned earlier, the family first model of marriage. So the family first model of marriage, according to how Dr. Wilcox defines it in his book, Get Married, is that marriage is about romance. Okay, so don't hear that I'm saying, oh, romance doesn't matter, the connection doesn't matter. It is about romance, but also about kids, money, and raising a family together. So the way I would put it is a family first model of marriage is going to be more missionally minded than purely self-fulfillment. So it's going to be marriage as the means to an end, not marriage as the end. Now think about all of the movies we watch as kids, Disney movies, princess movies, fairy tales. Where do the movies normally end? At the wedding. It's all about the lead up, right? Even a lot of the romance books and things like that. It's about the chase. It's about the dating. It's about the will they, won't they? Are they going to get together? The falling in love story. And then at the end, maybe you get a little bit of, if the wedding is even shown at all, you get like a little bit of a wedding ceremony and, running off or riding in a horse-drawn carriage off into the sunset, and they lived happily ever after. And that's it. Because it's like that was the goal, right? They got married. They achieved it. They found their soulmate. What left is there to do? And I think a family first marriage, and I'm going to add even one that doesn't have kids or doesn't have kids yet, is still maybe a mission first marriage, wherein marriage is seen as an institution that is objectively good, and that you are going to be more successful by working together as a team to accomplish whatever that mission may be. The foundation of your marriage should be love, but covenantal love, not emotionally based love, which is actually just infatuation or feelings, chemicals, hormones in the brain. But true covenantal love, yes, should be the basis of There are 2 yellow butterflies flying around outside of my window as I'm talking about this. I'm just going to go ahead and, for the sake of the podcast episode, I'm going to imagine that they are a pair and they are in love. So there you go. See, love does matter, and it can feel magical, and the romantic connection is amazing. But as we've seen, looking at kind of what happens when people have the soulmate view of marriage, it doesn't lead to very much satisfaction. And so when you are more missionally minded of, I want to accomplish things in life with somebody for a greater good, and marriage is one of the best vehicles to do that through, then I'm going to find somebody that I love and that I'm aligned with missionally, that we have the same vision and goals outside of ourselves, not just goals for our own personal fulfillment, but actually broader goals and visions. And we're going to unify and we're going to become stronger in doing that. So if you want to look at a Christian perspective, marriage as an institution, it sounds negative to say a means to an end, but marriage isn't the ultimate end. That's not the ultimate goal of life. But through marriage, there are some very important things that are accomplished here on earth. First, the reflection of the unity between Christ and his church. So most fundamentally, this is what Paul writes about in the New Testament. A marriage between a man and a woman is reflective of the love and unity between Jesus Christ and the church, which is often called the body of Christ. We're supposed to be representing that kind of unity and that kind of love to the world, to give a picture of how beautifully Jesus loves his people. So it's supposed to be a very beautiful picture of love, but not the, emotionally based love where just kind of the hormones and that infatuation is the connection. Actually, what the Bible says is the highest form of love is laying your life down for your friends, dying. And that's what Jesus did. And it also tells husbands to lay your life down for your wife like Christ did for the church. He gave his life up for her. So that's the kind of love we're talking about, a love that truly puts the other person first and is willing to sacrifice for another. That deepest kind of love. That's what marriage is supposed to model and be a picture of. But in addition to that, the biblical purpose of marriage is to be a foundational building block of society in creating the family unit. By a man and a woman marrying in the institution of marriage, which again is supposed to be covenantal, meaning lifelong, self-sacrificing, putting the needs of others before your own. That is the safest environment for children to be born into, because it is biological parents who love their children and who are willing to sacrifice for the sake of the family and raise their children together, giving the children the most love and protection that is possible in this world. Now, obviously, we live in a broken world. So sometimes parents die. Sometimes biological parents aren't able to take care of their children. And so you have the beauty of adoption, which is a picture of God adopting us into his family. And so it's not saying that those are the only families that can be loving. But I think, again, if you just look statistically speaking, kids who are raised in a loving home with biological mom and dad tend to have the best life outcomes. So marriage reflects the unity and the love, the self-sacrificial covenantal love between Christ and the church. It is the foundational building block of the whole society by creating a safe environment in which a family can blossom and flourish. And also it allows us to express love for another person that is unlike any other earthly love. So there is, again, that special, intimate, romantic element. And so that is a very close bond. It says the two shall become one. That is a unique type of relationship that we have on earth. And those who are able to get married, they get to enjoy that. But those are the goods that marriage can provide. Finding that one perfect person that basically just mirrors your own desires and fulfills you by being there for you, that's not the ultimate goal of marriage. And people who seek that, they're going to be disappointed because there's no perfect person out there other than Jesus Christ. Everybody is going to fail to make you happy in some way, even if you think that you have the most amazing marriage on the planet. So there are other goods too. So those are kind of like, again, the biblical view, the Christian view of the goods of marriage. But Wilcox states welfare of your children, which that aligns with a safe family, and even the size of your 401k, because contrary to what we often hear in culture, getting married is actually financially beneficial for women and men. So both men and women are more financially successful and secure when they are married. Let's talk about those feelings though. Remember, again, referring back to You Have a Calling for the second time in this episode and the podcast episode I did reviewing that book. People tend to get more passionate about what they become more skilled at. So she was saying, even if you have a job that isn't necessarily your passion, that you weren't originally super jazzed about, the more you work at it and you become skilled at it and you become really good at it, or your care for that job actually grows. And so people can become passionate about a role, even if they weren't initially, because they worked hard at it, they've invested a lot of time and energy into it, and they've become skilled at it. And that passion is something that has been nurtured. And that can be very fulfilling. There's a sense of accomplishment there. And so that I say that and remind us of that because it's applicable to marriage as well. When we are willing to work at a marriage, even after that initial infatuation or those feelings of being in love fade away, or even just during, kind of fall off or get buried in a hard season or a busier season of life, the more you invest intentionally into that kind of covenantal sacrificial love, that kindles the love, that keeps it alive. And that is what makes the marriage last and makes the love last, instead of just expecting to be fulfilled by the other person. And again, obviously this works best and really works at all when both partners are doing that. But you're investing into caring for the other person and you're sowing seeds of love and passion so that the initial love that you felt at the beginning continues to grow throughout your marriage in different seasons of life. Here's another quote from Wilcox that I think I'm just going to read. "The paradox of marital happiness is that those who prioritize it the most are the least likely to find it. It's not that looking for happiness in marriage is bad. It's that placing happy feelings front and center is usually a sign of unrealistic expectations and emotional immaturity. The happiness that devotees of the soulmate model are pursuing is usually not the same as contentment or stability. More often, it's a highly transient state of euphoria." And again, a little later on, he says, "Happiness, both in life and in love, is less likely to be found when pursued directly. And happiness is more likely to appear when we set our compass on greater destinations beyond our limited view." And that goes back to what I said a few minutes ago about marriage being something that we need to see if we're going to participate in it, if we're going to enter into a marriage, as something that is a means to an end, not the ultimate end. Something that is an objective good, something that contributes to other tangible and transcendental goods. Again, that missionally minded marriage, that mission view of marriage. And again, this goes to how we were created and so much of knowing what we believe about all kinds of different topics. It really boils down to, what do we believe about ourselves? Why are we even here? Why were we created? Why are we the way that we are? If we can understand those very fundamental questions about ourselves, about the nature of humanity, about the nature of who we are, then it becomes a lot clearer when we try to discern the why behind our beliefs in many other areas, including marriage and relationships. We know that we were, going back again to the Christian worldview, we were created as image bearers of God. We were created to represent Him here on this earth. As Christian believers, our goal is to share the love of Christ with others and to spread the gospel. So you could also say, if you just wanted to be very general, that we were created for something bigger and more, to live outside of ourselves. We're not answerable just to ourselves, and our biggest goal in life isn't to just feel happy and satisfied. Think about how shallow that is. I mean, think about all the little inconveniences that we have, on a day-to-day basis, even in a very privileged context like the United States of America. Again, those first world problems that can nevertheless be very irritating. If feeling happy and self-fulfilled is our goal, then any little irritant or obstacle that comes our way is going to make us feel like we're failing at life. Like we're failing to hit our highest goal because we're not feeling happy and fulfilled at that time. And any relationship, whether it's marriage, whether it's kids potentially, whether it is a friendship, is going to be viewed through the lens of, does this make me happy? It's kind of like Marie Kondo, throwing out all of the clutter. Does this bring me joy? And of course, that's talking about materialistic things, like you want to declutter your house. But what about people? Like we have that same view oftentimes of actual relationships. Bringing me joy right now? Nope. Okay, you're out. Now, obviously, we do want to be joyful, but the Bible says that joyfulness is a fruit of the Spirit. It's something deeper that can withstand various circumstances, because the Bible tells us to rejoice at all times, and it also says you're going to have trials. So people may not like that, but if you think about how life really works out, that's actually a very realistic view, probably a lot more realistic than anything you see in romance novels or from Hollywood about how life actually works. It's not about being happy. It's not about getting all the puzzle pieces lined up correctly in terms of the right job, living in the right place, finding that soulmate, and having just the right friends, and then constantly calling those out when, okay, this isn't as happy as I'd like to be. It's about living outside of yourself, living for something bigger, living for a greater purpose, and aligning yourself with people that you can pursue that purpose with, and realize that, yes, you can have that romance, you can have that connection and that intimacy in marriage, but is when the trials of life come and those irritants and obstacles come, those feelings, or in other words, that what Wilcox said, that transient state of euphoria, that might ebb and flow a little bit. That doesn't mean that your love needs to end, and it doesn't mean that, oh no, I married the wrong person. It just means that you need to keep investing in that skill of staying in love, investing in that other person by having a covenantal view of love, which is self-sacrificial, laying your life down for somebody else. I think most people, even if they don't have the best of marriages, would probably say, oh, yeah, I would, I'd take a bullet for my spouse. Well, what about the little things day to day? Like, can you not just actually lay your life down for your spouse, but can you sacrifice in the little ways on a day-to-day basis, the little things that are obstacles against what you want and you desire? Because if every little thing you are constantly resisting to having to sacrifice little once for the sake of another person, then that's expressive individualism. That's the soulmate myth, and that leads to unhappiness, and it leads to more divorce. And speaking of divorce, let's see, okay, we talk about this in contrast to the soulmate myth of kind of family first, marriage, or, and the way I put it, the mission-minded marriage. How does that actually work out? Well, here's Dr. Wilcox again. The California Family Survey, the same one we cited earlier, found that husband and wives who embraced the range of goods associated with the family-first approach to marriage were 58% more likely to be satisfied with their marriages compared to husbands and wives who were adherents of the soulmate model. So it's the family first. And another thing, Dr. Wilcox uses a phrase, we before me. So it's putting somebody else before yourself. It's realizing that being happy and feeling satisfied and achieving your innermost desires and expressing yourself the most that you can, those actually aren't the top goals of life, and they shouldn't be the top goals of marriage either. The Bible says that people who lose their life actually find it, which is another way of saying we learn who we truly are and really know ourselves the most when we know who we were created to be. And we can't know who we were created to be if we don't know our Creator. So that's the most important relationship that is going to help put all of our other relationships in context and ultimately lead to the most flourishing and satisfaction. So that's the soulmate myth. Let me know what you think, whether you believe this myth, whether you have in the past, how it's worked out for you if you are married. And I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback. Don't forget what I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, though. If you want to go to the Raising Biblical Kids Conference, it's in Grapevine next month, November 15th, 2025. It's from Genuine Family Ministries, which is run by Andrea Crum. She's been on the No I podcast. She's amazing, and you can get a discount by using the discount code SAVE10. That's SAVE, all caps, 10